Hi, I'm Missy from on William Street. This week we're going to talk about one of my favorite quilting techniques, applique. So we're going to do things a little bit different today. So typically a lot of applique you use a fusible, some type of fusible sheet, fusible web to hold your applique pieces onto your fabric. But I'm going to show you how easy it is and the different methods to do applique without having to have those fusible sheets. Okay, so I really focus on raw edge applique. It's what I like, it's what I use on all of our quilts. You can use one of these techniques for needle turn applique as well, so keep that in mind as you're watching this. So the two methods that I'm going to go over with you is fusible thread and a glue stick. Okay, so fusible thread, this is something that you will put in your bobbin and you'll sew it onto the back of your pieces. The brand that I prefer is Superior Threads. It's Charlotte's Fusible Web. This one is the one that I like best. It's got really easy instructions on the back that you can follow because you are going to want to increase your stitch length. So I increase it all the way to the point where it's almost like a basting stitch, because then it's just going to come out so much easier as you're ironing your pieces in place. So I'm going to go over and show you the steps and some different methods to use this in your quilting. So the pattern that I'm using today is our dusk-like pattern, which you can get through our Etsy shop. So we have these teardrop petals, and I've already cut one out, and I just want to show you this technique that I like to use when I'm doing a lot of appliques, especially when it's something that is one applique and multiple times. So I like these cardboard pieces. It's like you can use a cereal box or cardboard that comes in special paper. I hold on to those and things. So I'm going to take my printed template and I'm going to just trace around it. This is just going to give me a sturdier template to use on my fabric so I can use it multiple times without having that paper kind of wear out on you and having to be replaced so often. So now that we've got our template cut, our template drawn on, we'll go ahead and cut it out, and I've already got one cut here for us. And then we're going to use this to trace onto our fabric. Now that we've got our template, we're going to go ahead and trace it onto our fabric. And I like to make sure that I'm using a fabric pen that is going to come off. So this one is a heat erase pen that once you push on the iron, it's going to come right off. So we're going to go ahead and trace around our template. So this process up to this step is really going to be the same for either method, either the fusible web or the glue stick. So there's not going to be any difference between those two. So there we have our piece traced on. And now this is where you can have two options. Your first option is going to be to cut out that pattern now and then sew the fusible web on afterwards. Or you can go ahead and sew the fusible web onto it and then cut it out afterwards, which I am going to do because it helps with this point from getting caught in your machine, and we want to make sure that that point's not getting caught underneath our machine and having issues. So I'm going to sew this on and then we will cut it out. Okay, so I've got our fusible thread already in our bobbin, so we'll go ahead and put that in. As far as the thread on the top, it's just regular basic thread, whatever you want to use. We've just got our basic white thread in here. So like I said, we want to make sure we elongate our stitches. So I'm going to make them as long as possible. This will just make things easier as we take that thread out. And then we'll go ahead, and you just want to go ahead and sew just as close to that edge as you can. I usually typically try to keep it between 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch in from that edge. I'm just going to sew all the way around using that nice big stitch. Now, keep in mind that if you are using this for hand turn applique, you will need to make sure that you sew in further so that you've got room to hand turn that fabric under. But we're going to go ahead and just use the raw edge technique that I prefer. lift your feed dogs as we go around those curves. And you can see that this is not precise. It doesn't have to be, because it's going to come out. You're not going to see these stitches at all. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and we'll cut our fabric piece out. Now this is my favorite part of the process. We've got it on our iron. So you can see I've already got one piece ironed on. You're not seeing that white stitching all the way around. So we're going to go ahead and get this second piece ironed on to our fabric. Just a good hot iron. And you're going to see as this fuses, that thread, you can kind of start to see it coming up a little bit. This is what I love about the Charlotte's Fusible web. So that top thread comes right off, and our piece is fused nicely and is ready to be appliqued. So the other method that we're going to use is glue stick. So when you're using a glue stick, you want to make sure that it is a washable glue stick. So this is just simply an Elmer's washable school glue. It's the one that is the disappearing purple, so that you know how much glue you have on your piece, and then it will easily wash off when you wash your quilt for the first time. So for the glue stick method, we're going to have our piece already cut out. So this is not one of those ones where you put the glue on first after you've traced it and then you cut it out. So you want to make sure that you've got your piece cut out already. So we're going to take our glue, just a little bit around the outside. And then we are going to just press it onto our fabric. I like to use this method mostly when I'm doing larger pieces, or pieces that you might need to finagle a little bit to get them to lay just exactly where you want them to, because this one is a little more forgiving than the others if you needed to lift it off and replace it and put it back down. So especially with larger pieces, when you're doing an applique piece that it's like the whole quilt or the whole block is one big applique piece with just pieces cut out of the inside of that. I did a seahorse years ago, and this was definitely the method I used, because that seahorse was the entire quilt. So this made it easy, so you could lay down the piece. If it wasn't straight and flat, then you lift it up and lay it back down. So this method works great for that. Now that we've got all of our pieces fused on and ready, we're going to go ahead and talk about the appliquing them on to the quilt. So what I like to use most is a blanket stitch. So I've got some pieces here just to show you some examples. So a blanket stitch it goes around the outside edges and then it goes in a little bit and catches that fabric to hold it in place. Not all machines have this stitch, so there are other options that you can use, and I want to show you some of those. So one of them is just a straight stitch all the way around the piece. Now this one is going to give you, especially with the Raw Edge Applique, a little more of a frayed look after you've washed it, because this fabric is going to fray a little bit on you. So if that's not a look you want, then try one of these others. So another option is just as simple as a zigzag stitch, and you can really determine the width of this stitch. You can change it to increase it or decrease it to get the look that you want. And then also it's the really tight zigzag stitch, which is referred to as a satin stitch, that is going to get that really tight and give you a bold line around the outside. So you'll notice that these are all stitched in white. We did that on purpose so that you can see what those stitches look like on the pieces. When I applique, I like to match my thread to my fabric so that it really blends into those colors. So as I stitch up these, I am going to show you with a white thread though, so that you can see what those look like. Another option that you can use is decorative stitches. So I have this quilt block. This is from our Pixie Dust quilt, which you can also get in our Etsy shop. So you can use, a lot of machines come with some really fun decorative stitches, and that is what I used. Around these wings, I used a metallic thread with a fun decorative stitch because I could really get away with it with these wings. And so there are projects and ways that you can do that as well if you want to throw a decorative stitch into your applique too. Now that we've got our pieces fused in place, so this one's nicely fused with our thread, this one we've got on with our glue stick, so it's keeping it in place as well. We're going to sew around our pieces. So as I mentioned, I do like to use the blanket stitch. So I'm going to start down here in the point, and the reason I'm going to start right here in the point is with this particular quilt, the seams are really going to meet right up to that point when you sew the sashing on, so it'll help hide the little bit of a back stitch that I'm going to do. So do a quick little back stitch in it. Now if you don't want to do a back stitch in your fabric, you can always gather the threads and underneath, after you've sewn this on, bury them into your stitch as well. So whichever method you prefer. Another trick that I like to point out when appliquing is if your machine has the option to move your needle position where it either stops up all the time or stops down all the time, I recommend having it stop down all the time. And the reason for this is if you need to turn, your needle's already in place and you don't have to worry about losing your spacing or getting too much thread when you have to turn that. And then just go slow around these curves. And pick it up and move it as you need to. I should also point out that I am using a walking foot, and the reason for that is because I always use a walking foot. My walking foot is just on my machine so much anymore. I don't even pay attention to it anymore. So I use it for applique even. But you don't need to have a walking foot. I would recommend still having an open edge foot like this so that you can see what you're sewing. That's just going to make it so much easier to stay nice and tight with that edge of your applique. So just go nice and slow. Don't worry about how many times you're lifting your needle and moving around that curve. You just want to keep it nice and tight. And our piece is done, all appliqued on and ready to finish up the rest of the pieces and the quilt itself. So I really love using these two methods. When I have pieces that aren't little tiny, like my ballerinas, I do stick to our heat and bond Featherlight Fusible. When I have something with those little thin arms and the small shoes, I want something that's going to hold things on and give it a little more of that durability. But these are great when you've got the bigger pieces or when you've got layers. So this is something, either of these two methods work great when you've got layers of applique on top of each other, so then you don't end up with a lot of that stiffness from the heat and bond. If you like what you've seen, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube videos so you don't miss anything. We have videos that come out almost pretty much weekly. We want to share all of the tips and the tricks that we've learned over the years of quilting with you to help you become a better quilter as well. So make sure you subscribe to that, check out our newsletter online, and check out all of the patterns in our Etsy shop. Like I said, you can get these two patterns, the Dusk Light or the Pixie Dust, our little fairies, on our Etsy shop. And if you have any questions, feel free to message us. We're happy to help. We'll see you next week.